Hello English learners! In today's video you can practice your English listening skills while learning about a very important American holiday. So if learning more about Indigenous Peoples Day is something that interests you, keep watching. On the second Monday in October, Americans across many states and many cities celebrate a holiday known as Indigenous Peoples Day. It's a holiday where we honor, we acknowledge, and we remember the rich culture and contributions of America's first people. Native Americans, we often call them. The indigenous peoples of the United States. So, how did Indigenous Peoples Day come about? Although there were similar holidays celebrated in the United States prior to this date, the first official Indigenous Peoples Day began in 1992 in the pretty progressive city of Berkeley, California. It was spearheaded by a group who called themselves the Berkeley Resistance 500. It was a group composed of members of the local Native American community and those allied with the cause. Why was it called the Berkeley Resistance 500? Well, we'd have to take a little step back. You see, the second Monday in October is also the day where Americans celebrate a man named Christopher Columbus. I'm sure most of you are familiar with him. The Italian explorer credited with discovering America. Yes, discovering the Americas. This was the actual language used in many American textbooks. Although not quite true, considering Native Americans had already been living on this land for thousands of years. But anyway, Columbus Day had been a federal holiday since 1968 in the United States. But many Native Americans, Native American groups, and allies did not agree with the idea of celebrating a man who supported the enslavement and terrorizing of the native population. Millions of indigenous people, the majority of the population present before 1492, had been wiped out, dying from either violence or disease brought over by Europeans. 1992 would mark 500 years since Columbus first landed in the Americas. So instead of celebrating 500 years since his discovery, the group the Resistance 500 decided they wanted to change the narrative, or perhaps add to the narrative. The day was going to represent 500 years of Indian resistance to their mistreatment, which began after Columbus's arrival. The group was able to successfully persuade key council members and politicians in Berkeley, effectively making the switch from celebrating Columbus Day to celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day. In the years following, other cities and states followed suit and having their own Indigenous Peoples Day. Currently, Alabama, Alaska, Hawaii, Idaho, Maine, Michigan, Minnesota, New Mexico, North Carolina, Oklahoma, Oregon, South Dakota, Texas, Vermont, Washington, D.C., and countless other cities across the United States celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day either along with Columbus Day or in place of Columbus Day. And the list keeps growing every year. And in fact, in 2021, President Joe Biden marked Indigenous Peoples Day an official federal holiday along with Columbus Day. In the United States, there are groups that strongly oppose Columbus Day and instead think that we should just celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. There are groups that are strongly in favor of Columbus Day and see him as an honorable figure in the history of the Americas. This is especially true for certain Italian American communities who identify with Christopher Columbus, and these Italian Americans also experienced much discrimination and many hardships in the past. And then there are those that feel we can commemorate both holidays, acknowledging the histories and contributions of both Italian Americans and Indigenous peoples of the Americas. This was a tweet on Indigenous Peoples Day made by the American Civil Liberties Union. In it, we can clearly see that they support replacing Columbus Day entirely with Indigenous Peoples Day, referring to Columbus simply as that other guy. In this tweet, made by the National Italian American Foundation in 2020, we can see how many Americans see Columbus Day as not so much a day to celebrate Christopher Columbus himself, but as a day to recognize and remember the hostilities experienced by many Italian Americans and see it as a day to celebrate Italian American heritage. New York City public schools have decided to find some sort of middle ground. In 2021, they renamed Columbus Day Italian American Heritage Day and celebrate it along with Indigenous Peoples Day. The Department of Education spokesperson in New York said Italian American and Indigenous Peoples Day will celebrate the contributions and legacies of Italian Americans and recognize that Native people are the first inhabitants of the land that became our country. Regardless of any opposing views, it is important to put forth an historically accurate narrative. It is important to honor the rich culture of America's first people. It is even more important to sympathize with the plight and struggles experienced by Indigenous people in the United States. And Indigenous Peoples Day is a great day to recognize and remember all of the important contributions made by America's Indigenous population. And that is the end of today's video, English learners. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a little bit about Indigenous Peoples Day. And until next time, English learners.